Please, please, folks. I know it's been a while. Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you, please. You're embarrassing me. Enough. Please, everyone. Please be seated. I know it's been a while, but please. Folks, you make it so hard to be humble. Thank you for that. That was very, very touching. Thank you. Okay, well, hey, I am glad to be back. I've been gone for a couple weeks, just been so busy working with the Tampa Bay Rays. I don't think I've worn this shirt yet because it's recently. This is a Tampa Bay Rays shirt that was handed out to the fans, and I happened to get one in honor of Dave Wills, who was an announcer for the radio announcer for the Tampa Bay Rays for many, many, many years, and he tragically died of a heart attack, and so they honored him. They entered him into the Tampa Bay Rays Hall of Fame. There's only a few folks: Wade Boggs, Carl Crawford, a couple others that are in that, and so that's what this shirt's all about. But yes, it's been a little while, partially because I've been very busy, but partially because, as I've said before, I spend so much time studying. Is it possible to study too much? Of course, we know that it's good to read, and even better to read good things. And also, of course, if you're going to teach others, then you need to study your topic. I mean, how are you going to teach something if you don't know your subject? But I also know that we read in the antepenultimate, third from the last, verse in Ecclesiastes 12:12, "Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body." Okay, well, at this point, I'm not talking about writing any books, but rather the last part, that much study wearies the body. I have to agree that studying a lot can wear you out. But the context of this verse, here's a little Bible study before we get into our study for today. But the context of this verse, which again is found in the last chapter of Ecclesiastes, is that Koheleth, who's the teacher in Ecclesiastes, who I believe is not Solomon, has realized that everything in life apart from God is the Hebrew word havel. That's Hevel, or Havel, Hebel, but I believe it's pronounced havel, meaningless. And for any of you who are part of Grace Christian Fellowship, I went verse by verse through Ecclesiastes, and we talked about that word havel a lot, that it's meaningless. In other words, nothing in this world or in this life will bring us ultimate peace and satisfaction. So striving after things, as Ecclesiastes begins with wine, women, wealth, et al., will result in emptiness, havel. And at this point in verse 12, at the very end of the book, he's saying that even becoming a great scholar will ultimately leave you empty. I'm not implying I'm a great scholar before we go any further. But if knowledge is your means to find satisfaction, you're going to be empty. The answer to all of man's striving, the solution to man's quest for satisfaction in this life, and of course in the life to follow, is found in the penultimate and the last two verses of Ecclesiastes, which immediately follow this 12th verse about excessive study. Now all has been heard, and here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. And as believers, we all know this to be true. Peace, contentment, and satisfaction are only found in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, why am I sharing all this? Because I love to read my Bible and study all sorts of theological and historical things, especially historical things as they relate to the history of the church. But sometimes I get so involved in what I'm reading that I have information overstimulation. and I get bogged down with what I think I ought to be sharing with you in this study of church history. And this is why, after, what is this? I think this is lesson 20, this is lesson 27, and that we're still just around the 5th, 6th, and 7th, century. But that's okay. So here's how this relates to this particular lesson, part 27, in my series on heroes and heretics within the history of the Christian church. For quite a while, I was putting out one lesson each week, and I'm not sure how long it's been since the last lesson, part 26, on the 7th century, but I'm pretty sure it's been over 2 or 3 weeks since lesson 26. And as a side note, I don't understand how the YouTube algorithms work, but that last lesson, which I don't think was anything extraordinary, has had nearly 300 views. Now, that might not be a big deal when you look at some, preacher or some other thing that you follow, some political thing, or, what else. It has thousands upon thousands of views, but this little Bible study, this little church history lesson, and my previous ones on the Psalms and attributes of God, it's really just for, a handful of you folks that watch it. Sometimes I get 20, 30, 50, 60, views. I don't even know who's all watching this because honestly, nobody comments. And so I would like to know who's out there listening. I have a feeling some of you who were in the actual class that I had previously at the church may be watching, but maybe they aren't. Maybe it's other folks. So if you don't mind, I'm just curious. Write me a little note. This is, there's been a couple strangers who have now subscribed, to my page. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. But anyway, that last one had nearly 300 views. The most of any of my videos. Why? I have no idea. And I'm not going to get big head over that because I'll soon discover that today's episode might get only 20 views. Oh, how the Lord likes to keep us humble. Well, the good news is, out of all of this jabbering, all that I was reading and preparing for the next century, the 8th century, I happened to be listening to one of my favorite progressive rock bands called Iona, Iona. And they are from Ireland or from Great Britain, that whole area. And they loved to sing and play about ancient Celtic Christian faith of Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. Now, I say that word Celtic because if any of you are Boston basketball fans, you say, that's not right. It's the Boston Celtics. Well, I hate to tell you, they're wrong. All these years, it's Celtic, Celtic, and Celtic has to do with Ireland, Scotland, and all that area, there. Anyway, this band, I happened to be listening to them, and I got 10 of their CDs. Remember what a CD is? This is a CD. Right here. Anyway, this band, so beautiful, long, beautiful songs, and they talk about just a lot of the Irish missionaries and things that we're actually going to talk about today. And that's why I'm saying, all of this, because I was listening to this, and their name, Iona, is significant in church history, as you will soon learn. Anyway, as I was listening to this album here, The Book of Kells, which is the topic itself that we'll talk about some other time, I was reminded of a number of important but little known Irish monastic missionaries, such as Brendan the Navigator, Columbanus, along with Patrick, a woman named Brigid, and that's why you'll find that in Ireland, 2 of the most popular names are Patrick and Brigid, but I'll say more about that in a little bit. But of course, we already talked about, Patrick. And I decided as I was listening to these guys, and it reminded me of Brendan and all of this, I thought, oh man, we must talk about these Celtic individuals because although they were all from the 5th, 6th and 7th centuries. I know we're moving into the 8th, but they're all from the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries. They had a major impact on the Christianization of Great Britain and Europe, which will be pretty apparent when we get into the 8th century, maybe next lesson. So here we are. We already know that Patrick had a major impact on Ireland for the gospel. But what you probably don't realize, and I'm not even sure if I mentioned it in my discussion on Patrick, maybe I did, but he wasn't the first missionary to go to the Emerald Isle. That distinction belongs to a fellow named Palladius, Palladius. I'll try my best to put all these names at the bottom. But Palladius was sent to Ireland in 431 by Pope Celestine. I think you might pronounce it Celestine, like Celeste, but Pope Celestine in 431. He apparently took along with him 3 other men, Auxilius, Auxilius, Secundinus, Secundinus, and Iseremus, Iserninus. Again, I'll put those names down. Now, although Palladius did some very basic preliminary work with the people of Southeast Ireland, you remember when we talked about Patrick, that was a very pagan area with druids and multitudes of little isolated individualistic, kingdoms, in there. So it was a tough place to go. So even though he did some basic preliminary work with the people of Southeast Ireland, he eventually left and went back to North Britain because he wasn't very successful and he didn't like the area, and it's a rough area. Palladius then went to Scotland and he did much better there. Now, Patrick was captured and taken to Northern Ireland as a teenager, as we talked about that, around the same time that Palladius arrived in Southern Ireland to preach. And of course, as I said back when we looked at the life of Patrick, after having a dream about going back to England and that there would be a ship waiting for him in a harbor 200 miles or so away, he escaped from his captors, found the boat, and went back home. But in another dream, the people of Ireland, remember this, were calling him back to come back and share the gospel with them, as he did around 460 AD. So you see it sometime later, but Palladius was there first. Now, I won't go into the details of Patrick's life and ministry since we've already done that a while back. But for the sake of understanding the timetable, of the missionaries and saints of Ireland after Patrick, he died in March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 492. Okay, keep that date in mind. Now, apparently, during the later part of Patrick's ministry and life, there was a saintly woman named Brigid, Brigid, but they also pronounce it Bridget. That might be the Anglicanization, of that word. In other words, the modern version of that name. So it's Brigid, Brigid, Brigid. And she was born around 451. Now remember, Patrick died in 492. So while he was still in the latter part of his ministry, this is when Bridget was born, 451, and she died in 525. She founded a very influential monastery in Kildare. Remember Kildare? Dr. Kildare? Richard Chamberlain. Kildare, Kildar, which means Church of the Oak. The King of Leinster, 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 we'll talk about him again later, was impressed with this lady, Bridget, this holy woman Christian, that he gave her a large plot of land, which is now the town of Kildare in central Ireland. One of these days, I don't know how, but I want to get to Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England. So let's have a GoFundMe. No, I'm just teasing you here. But anyway, I got to see all these places that I've been, studying about. So anyway, that's now the town of Kildare in central Ireland. And she had built her monastery that became renowned for the teaching of the Christian faith and for raising up other women for the ministry. Now, this is back in the time of Patrick when he was, again, really doing some great work there. Now, there is a lot of folklore concerning Brigid. And I will say before we go any further, there's a lot of folklore about these other Irish missionaries I'm going to share with you. Because you remember, this was a very pagan area and with strange Druid beliefs. And so what happened is that the Christianization of some of that, turned in the mythologies. And so some of what I'll tell you today about these different people may be like a little far-fetched, but they could also be very true also because the Lord did many miraculous things there. So anyway, there's a lot of folklore concerning Brigid. And some of the stories are rather phantasmagorical in that the supernatural stories of her life are sometimes blended with the myth of an ancient Irish goddess also named Brigid. So you can see how these things can happen. Now, we won't concern ourselves with those myths and how it may or may not impact the story of the real Brigid, but what we do want to remember is that she was a godly woman who gave up everything to train believers to love Jesus and to love his word. Her approach to evangelism was different than Patrick's. Patrick's approach, if you remember, was more aggressive, and his aim was towards people in the Druid class who were advisors to the king. So he had influence in those sort of people. Remember, he'd do miraculous things. Remember, he set the fire off on the same date as a pagan group would put the fire that only the king could do it. The pagan king could do it, but Patrick went ahead and did it, and some miraculous things happened, and they all came to the faith. So that's how he influenced a lot of people. Brigid's approach was more gentler and welcoming to the Irish people and was directed towards commoners who continued to follow pagan rituals until her influence altered their belief system. And we see that. That's a normal way to evangelize. You're working with people who have, strange, beliefs. And so you share the gospel with them and tell them, all about Jesus and the resurrection. And, they might linger, with a few, other of their strange beliefs, but hopefully in time you can say, well, no, now that we're looking at the word, let's see what that's really saying and help them move away from those things. Okay, so although their methods varied, Patrick and Brigid, it is evident that Brigid's approach to conversion yielded greater results than Patrick's because it did not impose religion on the people, but instead molded their previous pagan beliefs into a genuine and devout acceptance of Christianity. But of course, this wasn't a competition. The work Patrick did with the royals and pagan leaders paved the way for the common folk that Brigid encountered to be accepting of the gospel. And that's just how the Lord works in his providence. Paul said to be all things to all people. He's become all things to all people to save some. Okay, that doesn't mean we live like the world to save some, but we understand there's different ways, different methods to share the faith. Some are much more intellectual. So C.S. Lewis would have a much different impact, than on someone else because of the groups of people they're talking to. Okay, anyway. Now, Ireland has 3 national saints, and Patrick and Brigid are 2 of them. She's the only female national saint in Catholicism. Now, we're not going to get sidetracked with Catholicism here. Remember, in the early centuries of Catholicism, number one, it wasn't even Catholicism, it was just a Christian faith, but it became more and more and more Catholic with the Pope and bishops and whatnot as the church grew. It still wasn't necessarily in bad shape, But as we moved into the Middle Ages, you're going to see it got really, messed up. So when I talk about these people being saints, don't say, oh, Catholic saints, we're not going to listen to them. No, these people I'm going to talk about, love Jesus and were very influential and very important, and we need to be listening to them and reading their things as well. So they were the two national saints. The third national saint of Ireland was a friend of Brigid named Finian. He was born in Leicester, Ireland, and remember, the king of this area is the one who gave Brigid land for her monastery. Anyway, Finian, F-I-N-N-I-A-N, of Clonard, C-L-O-N-A-R-D, was born in 470 A.D. and died in 549. Now, he's often called the Master of the Saints of Ireland, or the tutor of the Irish saints, because he was an incredible teacher of the word and a founder and builder of many monasteries. You're going to find that the people we're talking about today, their big thing was building monasteries. I hope with my last talk, I think it was my last talk, that we talked about monasticism and monks and whatever, that you get a different view of what monks were all about. Monks were responsible for education, for languages, for writing, for books. I mean, obviously the Christian faith is that do not besmirch, the monks. We have much to learn, from their practices. We might not agree with many of their ascetic, beliefs and extremes that they might be involved in, which could cross the line into works, salvation. But still, the work of the monks has been, overwhelmingly, positive. And you're going to see they built many, many monasteries that became schools and colleges and a great source of protection for people and growing, fruits and vegetables and just all sorts of things. So anyway, back to the monasteries here. One of the most prestigious monasteries was the one in Clonard, again, C-L-O-N-A-R-D, which is where he gets his saintly name, Finian of Clonard. Now, I don't know if it was the same king, Leinster, that gave Brigid the land for her monastery, but the king of Leinster gave Finian a site to build a church. Then he headed up to Kildare, where Brigid was, and built another church while studying and teaching at Brigid's monastery. Finally, around 520 A.D., Finian arrived at Clonard, and here he got a large tract of land to set up his own ascetic community, where there were up to 3,000 monks. That's a lot of monks. These included the so-called 12 apostles of Ireland. Don't get bogged down in the idea of apostles and modern-day apostles, which I don't subscribe to. Some of the more charismatic persuasion like to call some of their leaders apostles, and what they mean by that is not the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter and whatever. They better refer, and not to, their God-ordained writers of the scripture, but they think they're church planners and that they're in charge of oversee many, many churches, so they call them apostles. I don't necessarily buy that. But these 12 apostles of Ireland are not true apostles, but what they mean by this expression that came up somewhere during this time in the Middle Ages, probably, that these were influential men who were trained, who were monks. There are 12 godly men who truly impacted Ireland for the gospel. And we're going to talk about a few of them here. Back to Finian, had a great reputation for his knowledge of the scriptures and expository preaching, my favorite subject, and thus Clonard became a center for biblical studies. Finian is said to have died in the Great Plague of 545-550 that swept through Ireland, And although most evangelical Christians aren't aware of him, he had a great influence on the Christian faith in Ireland. So remember that name, Finian, okay? And Brigid and Patrick, the three patron saints of Ireland. Now, the next person I want to talk about is quite an extraordinary fellow, known as St. Brendan, Brendan, the Navigator, born around 484 and died around 577 AD. You see, these guys are around the same time. He was one of St. Finian's 12 apostles of Ireland. He's also known as Brendan of Clonard, Clonvert. Well, that's not right because it's the same Clonard, because he was at the same blah 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 he was a student of Finian at this area. Brendan, he's also called Brendan the Voyager, Brendan the Bold, and Brendan the Anchorite. Now, here's a new word for you, anchorite. Randy, remember to put it down at the bottom. You would think that Brendan's other nicknames, Navigator, Voyager, you might think that anchorite is a seafaring word associated with the anchor of a ship, but it actually has nothing to do with that. An anchorite, anchor with I-T-E, is someone who, for religious, spiritual reasons, withdraws from secular society to be able to lead an intensely prayer-oriented ascetic life. Anchorites are frequently considered to be a type of hermit. But enough about nicknames. Let's talk about this guy, Brendan. Just as in the case of Brigid, the life of Brendan is full of fanciful stories that blur reality with fiction. But there's no doubt that Brendan was a man of faith. He was one of the 12 apostles of Ireland, and he had an intense missionary concept or vision that caused him to travel extensively by land and especially by sea, Brendan the Navigator, to share the gospel and to search for new lands and even look for the so-called land of promise, the Garden of Eden. He and some others were convinced that the Garden of Eden, or a paradise God had set apart out there in the sea somewhere, that they needed to discover. Now, what we know about Brendan is found in Irish annals and genealogies, as well as a mention in the life of Columba, Columba, who we will talk about next. Now, this biography of St. Columba, who was a contemporary of Brendan, was written 100 years after Columba and Brendan's deaths by a man named Adamnan, Adamnan, who was a highly respected abbot of the Iona Abbey. There is also an ancient work called The Life of Brendan, which is also called The Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot. The date of this piece of history is a mystery, but some scholars give the published date of around the 9th century. So it's a couple centuries later. Not many, but a couple. This work speaks of the numerous voyages that Brendan and up to 14 other monks who traveled with him in search of the land of promise. And as an explorer, he probably did land in the Canary Islands, which is south of Portugal, I believe, down there. Possibly also went to Iceland, that he called the land of fire mountains because of volcanoes. And the Faroe Islands, Faroe, these are little islands that are north of Scotland that I've always been fascinated with, mainly because Russ Taff, the contemporary Christian singer, wonderful guy, great voice. He did a CD called, I think he called it the Faroe Islands. And I thought, how strange. But he took a trip out there, this little group of islands, and it so impacted him that he did a whole album. It was about the Lord and everything, but he spoke about that land. But anyway, that Brendan probably landed there, possibly also Greenland, and get this, there are some navigational experts that believe that Brendan possibly landed in North America centuries before Columbus. As a matter of fact, I think in one of my church history, there it talks about, I don't know if I'm going to find it right now. Oh, there it is that, if you can see that picture there, see that little ship? That little ship there, you got that? That little ship there was made by a fellow, 1977, British navigation scholar Tim Severin attempted to create the journey to Newfoundland on an oxhide and oak bark curragh. That's what they call that boat, and succeeded. He even met playful whales along the way. But unlike Brendan, he did not celebrate Mass on their backs. That's part of the fanciful stories, that he came across whales and they found themselves, their boat, was all of a sudden on top of a whale, and they celebrated communion, there. Anyway, this guy traveled in 1977 from Ireland in a man-made boat like this and traveled and ended up in North America. So some think that Brendan might have gotten that far centuries before Columbus. We don't know, but I think it's an interesting thing. You've heard them talk about the Vikings possibly coming to North America. Well, it's not too far-fetched that Brendan would. Okay. Now, besides the possible mythical stories of the voyages of Brendan the Navigator, there was definitely a missionary and teaching heart and zeal with Brendan. He founded a number of monasteries all throughout Ireland and is revered as a productive evangelist of the gospel. So there's another one to keep in mind. So far we've mentioned Patrick, of course. And then there's Brigid, and then there's Finian, and then there's Brendan. Did I say him already? Who knows? But the next Irish missionary, evangelist, and abbot is St. Columba, Columba, who was born in 521 and died in 597. And he is credited with spreading Christianity to what is today Scotland. His name means dove. He was born in an area in Northern Ireland called Gartan, Gartan, in a remote district known as Glen Comisiel, whatever. That's why Columba is also known, especially in Ireland, as Cumseal or Columcille, with the Irish accent. That's Colmcille. So that's how he might be referred to. So if there's any of you of rich Irish, descent, like my dear friend Maureen, who may very well be watching this, Maureen and Pat Cambier. They just went to Ireland a while back, so she may very well confirm that oh yeah, the three, and she has a Roman Catholic background, so she may very well be aware of Patrick, Brigid, and all these guys. But who am I talking about right now? I forgot who we're talking about here. In any event, the latest one here, Columba, but Finian being the third guy. In any event, this guy Columba founded the important abbey of Iona, which became a dominant religious and political institution in the region for centuries. Again, as I mentioned, not only the name of this wonderful progressive Celtic Christian band from the United Kingdom, but it is a beautiful island in the inner Hebrides, Hebrides, off of the Ross of Mull, Mull, on the western coast of Scotland. And here I have a map. I'm sorry I'm not more technical than this, but here's Scotland, right there, and right there is Edinburgh, and right there is Glasgow, Glasnow, isn't he? The pitcher used to be with the Rays. Now he's at the Dodgers. Glasnow. Can't even. But over here is, and I'm going to teach you what the word mole, M-U-L-L, means. But right there is a little tiny island of Iona. And that little tiny island became a center of monastic work and evangelistic, work there. Now, as I mentioned, this island of Iona was the site of a highly important monastery during the early Middle Ages. It was founded in 563 by Columba, who sailed there from Ireland to live the monastic life. Now, Columba and 12 companions went into exile on Iona and founded the monastery. It was hugely successful, and many have played a role in the conversion, and may have played a role in the conversion to Christianity of the Picts and the Gaels. The Picts, we'll get to that word, where we get the word for the language of them is the Gaelic. So that's the Picts, P-I-C-T-S, and the Gaels, G-A-E-L, these were two groups of people who lived in Scotland and Ireland from its earliest days. Columba and his monks from Iona were also influential in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria on the eastern side of England. Now, you might remember that the Venerable Bede, B-E-D-E, of the 7th century that we've talked about recently, was born and raised in the area of Northumbria. So, from the work done by Columba and his fellow monks, headquartered at Iona, Iona became the center of one of the most important monastic systems of Great Britain and Ireland. Now, I think I was going to tell you about what a mole is. And if you interested in music and remember that Paul McCartney and his band Wings put out a single back in, 1980 something, that at the time became the greatest selling single in the history of music, called Mole, M-U-L-O, of Kildare, Mole of Kildare. And it's a little tiny piece of land that's right down here. Okay, right there is the Mole of Kildare, right there. And it's just a beautiful little area. And a mole is, you see all these little islands, all these little peninsulas here? The end of it, it's rounded out. Each of these, because of erosion, whatever, is kind of rounded out and is usually made of hard rock. And that's what a mole is. So there's so many moles, and I mentioned the Ross of Mole, and then the Mole of Kildare, and Iona is outside of a mole. They're the Mole of Ross, or Ross Mole, or something, like that. I'm throwing all this out to you for free. Mole of Kildare is a beautiful song. And you know what? Go to, since you're watching this on YouTube, make a note, because I don't want you to do it now. Finish watching this. But you need to Google, no, don't Google, just go on YouTube in the search and type in Mole, M-U-L-L, of Kildare. Mole of Kildare. And it's a beautiful little song, but it's all filmed at the Mole of Kildare. So you will see the beautiful little farmland and the water right there. It's gorgeous. So do yourself a favor and watch that. Now, I told you before that Finian is the third of the patron saints. And I was almost about to tell you that Columba is one of the patron saints, but he's not. He's highly respected there, but he was one of the 12 apostles of Ireland. I think I said that to you, okay? So that's Columba. Now, the last Irish saint that I like to talk about today is a fellow with a similar name to Columba, who lived around the same time, and this is Saint Columbanus. So it's Columba, C-O-L-U-M-B-A, and then N-U-S at the end of it. So Columbanus, that's how I'm going to pronounce it, was born 543 in the kingdom of Meath, which is in the central part of Ireland and the east side. and he died 615 AD while living in the kingdom of the Lombards, which in the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries took up most of Italy, other than the area surrounding Rome. Now, most of what we know about Columbanus is based on Columbanus's own words and by his biographer, a fellow named Jonas of Susa, in his Life of Columbanus, which was written between 639 and 641, a mere 24 years after his death. Now, Columba's name means dove, as I told you. Columbanus' name means little dove. At his conception, his mother was said to have had a vision of her child's remarkable genius. Doesn't every mother have that dream? But she apparently did. So with that going for him, Columbanus was given an excellent education at a nearby monastery. Now, as a young man in his late teens or maybe early 20s, Columbanus was plagued with good looks, intelligence, spiritual sensitivity, and charm. I understand, Columbanus. I feel your pain. But his biographer, Jonas, wrote, Columbanus' fine figure, his splendid color, and his noble manliness made him beloved by all. And therein lay the problem. Jonas continues, he aroused the lust of lascivious maidens, especially of those whose fine figure and superficial beauty are wont to enkindle mad desires in the minds of wretched men. Yeah, so the bottom line is what they're saying. It was the lust of the randy women that were tempting Columbanus. Sure. So as a young man, he was afraid he was on the brink of giving in to such vain lusts of the world. Because remember, he was raised and taught in the monastery. So in desperation, trying to deal with these lustful desires, he sought, or the lustful desires of the women, he sought the guidance of a local female hermit. Every town has a local female hermit that you can go to for romantic and career, advice. Anyway, according to Jonas, she proclaimed loudly after meeting him, "Away, O youth, away! Flee from corruption, into which, as you know, many have fallen." And Columbanus left her presence quickly and quite shaken by this brief encounter, and he packed up his things to take up the monastic life. You imagine that? Just hearing that line was enough to say, whoop, that's it. You talk about a short but effective counseling session. When he told his mother he was leaving, of course, she envisioned him as being some great scholar, which he was, but a different kind of scholar. When he told his mother that he was leaving to live the monastic life, she became so distraught that she blocked the doorway. But the spry and athletic young lad was undeterred. As Jonas said, he leaped over both threshold and mother. I love how that's worded. So thus began his peripatetic, and I've taught you that word before, I'll tell you about it again, that his peripatetic life. And you might remember I shared that word with you when we, one of our earlier sessions about the early church fathers, and a couple of them, how they roamed the land just teaching the gospel and sharing their philosophical, theological, ideas. It means, that word peripatetic means to wander from place to place. And in this sense, it refers to Columbanus's, the young student of Christ and monastic life, traveling from town to town, village to village, sharing the gospel to whomever would listen, and depended by faith that the Lord would provide food and shelter from those he encountered. And by thus doing so, Columbanus became one of the most successful missionaries in history. Now, Columbanus was a diverse fellow, to say the least. I couldn't think of another word to describe him. He was extremely strict towards himself and fellow monks in his monasteries, and he started many monasteries with rules of holy living that seemed way beyond what was necessary to be at peace with the Lord. But that's just how he lived. And he was apparently a fun fellow that loved puns, and they were often seen in his sermons and his writings. As playful as he could be, Columbanus was painfully serious about his faith. In his 40s, he left a monastery in Bangor, not Bangor, Maine, but Bangor, Ireland, to follow God's command, which was the same command given to Abraham. Get yourself out of your country. So with 12 companions, he left for Gaul. Now, if you aren't familiar with the area, although I'm sure you've heard of the word Gaul, before, Gaul was a region of Western Europe that encompassed present-day France, Belgium, Luxembourg, part of Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, and northern Italy. Now, a large part of Gaul, which had previously been Christianized, had reverted to paganism, back to paganism. And the remaining Christians that were there were likely nominal or Arian heretics. Remember the Arians that believed in Jesus was not God, that he was a created being. There was widespread, even though, St. Augustine and Athanasius and others refuted that stuff, it still was creeping up there. So Columbanus founded 3 monasteries in rapid succession in cities that I cannot pronounce for you. Just trust me that he did. Each one growing so quickly that new ones had to be created. Before he could build many more, he had a run-in with the polygamous king. The king's name was Theuderic, Theuderic, and his mother, Broomhilde. Now, when I was reading this and studying this and saw the name Broomhilde, Brun, Brunhilde, Broomhilde, does that sound familiar to any of you in a very foolish, cartoonish way? Do any of you remember the cartoon, the comic in the newspaper years ago called Broomhilde, about an ugly witch who had cohorts about her, and she's doing all these crazy and goofy things, and it was actually, quite funny. Well, when I read this name, Broomhilde, I'm thinking, how similar is that to Broomhilde? So you know me, that's part of that studying thing. I started researching on the name and the comic of Broomhilde. And the guy who developed it, I think he was the brother of the guy that did Little Abner. In any event, the name Broomhilde, Broom, Broom because of witch, and Hilda as a name, is based on the name Broomhilde, which was a kind of I don't want to say a witch, but kind of a wizardly like fictional mythological character, I think in the Germany area, back in this kind of time. And it comes from this queen, or the queen mother was actually named after this goddess, where they got the Broomhilde from, which I thought was pretty wild, and I threw that in for free. See, that's what happens when I do all the studying there for you. Anyway, the main riff that Columbanus had with the king was this king, I told you, was polygamous, so he had numerous wives, and that Columbanus wouldn't bless the king's 2, I think it was, illegitimate sons, which got grandmother very mad. Now, grandmother Broomhilde had previously been a source, an umbrella of protection over Columbanus whenever he might have gotten in some trouble with his personality and such. But not now. He upset the queen mother. And so Columbanus and his fellow monks were thrown out of the country. Now, this wasn't the only dispute that the hot-blooded and hot-headed monk's life that he experienced. He feuded with popes, with kings, with bishops, and even his own followers. Get this. After Gaul, not Gaul that we were talking about before, but a fellow, one of his most faithful, loyal disciples, Gaul, Gall. After Gaul became ill and could not travel, Columbanus forbade him to say Mass. That's a big deal when you're a monk. The ban was not lifted until Columbanus was on his deathbed. That's how demanding this hothead was. Now, anyway, Columbanus and his men roamed the continent preaching in what would become France, Germany, and Switzerland. Finally, he traveled to northern Italy to convert the Lombards. There, in his 70s, he took part in the construction of Bobbio, Bobbio, the first Itall, Irish monastery, where he died November 23rd, 613. His legacy is extraordinary. He and his disciple founded at least 60 and possibly more than 100 monasteries throughout Europe. And folks, as I've been studying all this and about all these monasteries that all of these guys formed and developed, it wasn't that they just started a Bible study somewhere and got 6 guys together and said, okay, there you got it, I'm out of here. I mean, they literally built monasteries. They had the favor of kings and other royalty, were donated money so they could build these things. But these guys weren't just evangelists and Bible scholars. They were actually carpenters and everything else. I mean, amazing stuff that we take so for granted now. Okay. Now, when I finally move, and we're almost finished now. So when I move into the 8th century, again, maybe the next lesson, we will hear more about how the influence of these Irish missionaries, Patrick, Brigid, Columba, Brendan, and Columbanus, and Finian, how they all brought Christianity to what's now referred to as Great Britain, as well as France, Germany, and surrounding areas. That it was, as a matter of fact, it's the title of the book that I shared with you when I talked about Patrick. Once again, it's in the mass of things here. The book by Thomas Cahill called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And you see, that's part of it, where the impact it had. And then How the Irish Were Saved, the cultural and faith of Celtic Christians in this Christian history edition here. The Irish had quite an impact. And we need to keep that in mind. And there's another great book on the story of Celtic spirituality. So anyway, I'm pretty sure that most of these people we talked about today, besides Patrick, you're not familiar with them. So I hope you now are familiar with them. And if I remember to put their names down the bottom of the notes, and hopefully you can do some more investigating about them. So, was that good stuff? I hope it was worth the wait, because sorry it took me so long. I'll try not to take so long next time. But I've been having so much fun with my job, with the Rays, and then just enjoying my family and everything. But I love teaching here too. So, let us close. I have no idea. I have my little timer right here that I forgot to push start. So I have no idea how long I shared that. I hope it wasn't too long. And let's have a word of prayer. And it's been a long day. And the Rays have lost 5 or 6 straight games. They lost today in extra innings. I was down there for it, working it. Had a lot of fun, but not looking good. So, okay. Father, thank you for meeting here with us. I do pray that this discussion, really not a discussion, this monologue on these great Irish missionaries, many of who have gone unmentioned in the modern evangelical church, and Lord, that's okay with them because they're in glory with you right now. They don't care. They're happy to be with you. But Lord, I hope we can learn much from their lives and example, Father, and that we can put to practice in our own life, some of these things, Father. So Lord, thank you again for meeting here with us. And I do pray you bless your people now as we go about our business. that we be faithful servants of the living God. And we thank you again for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So anyway, oh, no, that's unnecessary. I don't do this for the applause. Not at all. As Todd Rundgren said at the end of one of his albums, send money. Send money. No, don't send money. I'll go to prison for that. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you, folks. God bless you. Love you all. And we'll see you in the funny papers, as someone used to say years ago, Bromhilda. Okay, see ya. Bye now.